The landscape of the High Weald can be traced back to the age of the dinosaurs, over 130 million years ago. It was during this time that the Wealden sandstone that lies under your feet was laid down. Other layers of sand, clay and chalk were then deposited above the sandstone. Massive earth movements pushed the rocks of the southeast into a huge dome. Since then, erosion has stripped away the chalk and other rocks to expose the Wealden sandstone, which now forms the high ridges of the High Weald area of outstanding natural beauty, and Ashdown Forest itself. When the first people arrived in the Mesolithic period, the landscape of the High Weald was dominated by trees and wild animals, such as the auroch. Scientists now believe that the high ridges of Ashdown may never have been densely wooded.
The kind of traditional story about the English landscape is that it was covered with trees. Now the trouble with that is that there's nowhere within that landscape for the large herbivores that we know were here, and the carnivores that would have depended on this fauna. Maybe the mysterious time is, as you probably expect, the kind of prehistoric period. We do have things like flint flakes which indicate that man has been here since the kind of Neolithic period. We know that there is pre-Roman iron workings in this area, so we've got some artefacts and some kind of remains from that period.
When the Romans invaded in AD 43, they made a beeline for the High Weald. They had heard about the large deposits of iron. They exploited the High Weald's raw materials of wood, water and iron ore on an industrial scale to produce huge amounts of iron for their navy. See if you can spot two stretches of Roman road which cross Ashdown. They were built to help move the iron. By the Anglo-Saxon period, farmers were droving their livestock into the High Weald to graze on acorns and beech mast during the autumn. They would beat the trees to knock the acorns out of the trees for their pigs. The Normans set aside Ashdown as a royal hunting forest. It was then the playground of kings for over 300 years. You can still see the remains of a 23-mile-long pale which was built around the forest. This allowed deer into the forest and stopped them escaping. It consisted of an earth bank 4 to 5 feet high, topped with wooden fencing. It had a deep ditch on the forest side. People could pass through it by hatches and gates. You can track the route of the old pale in the modern place names like Chuck Hatch and Chelwood Gate, which surround Ashdown. Some of these entrances into the forest were, and still are, marked by pubs. The Tudors continued to hunt on the forest. Later, as at King's Standing, hides or standings were built. These were hidden raised wooden platforms from which deer were shot by hunting bow or crossbow as they were driven past. The Tudors also took advantage of the new blast furnaces introduced from France in the 15th century, which used enormous amounts of iron ore, charcoal and water to produce iron. Much of this iron was turned into cannons, used by the Royal Navy for fighting the Spanish Armada. You can still see the remains of the first water-powered blast furnace built in Britain at Newbridge, on the edge of the forest. During the 18th century, soldiers camped on the forest before fighting the Napoleonic Wars.
We know that there was a huge muster of regiments in Napoleonic times at Camp Hill, and the suggestion is that Camp Hill Clump is actually named from that event. There are musket ranges from the end of the 19th century. We've got at least 2 of those on the forest. And then certainly through the First World War, it was very extensively used for training. We know of extensive First World War practice trench systems where it was clear that soldiers going before they went out to Belgium or France actually dug practice trenches on the forest. Strictly speaking, they were supposed to have been filled in an agreement after the Second World War, but a lot of them have collapsed again, and you can still see the outlines of the kind of dog's tooth design for First World War trenches.
In 1885, a board of conservators was set up to safeguard the rights of the commoners. It had been their grazing and bracken cutting which was partly responsible for keeping the forest free of trees. Over the next few hundred years, their way of life gradually declined. As fewer commoners grazed and cut bracken, the trees began to spread. This has led to the gradual loss of open heath and the plants and animals which rely on it. In the last 30 years, Ashdown has become internationally recognised for wildlife, and the conservators have taken on the role of the commoners and now manage Ashdown as a refuge for wildlife and as a quiet place for you to enjoy.